Now in this demo, I want to show you how the default mode really works based on the property that you're binding. When controls are created and their properties are defined as dependency properties that can be bound to, by default, binding will only be supported one way. But there's a property you can set on the dependency property itself to make it so it will be a two-way binding by default. To show this, I'm going to create a custom control, just a simple user control, and we'll call it my custom control. For the content of that custom control, I'm just going to put a rectangle with a fill of gray by default and give it a name of the content. Then I'm going to drop into the code behind of that control and define a dependency property. So this dependency property is going to be of type brush called myBackground. And what's different about the declaration of this dependency property is notice this down here. With the default code snippet, it's going to define just a property metadata object here and allow you to set the default and possibly hook up a change handler. If you change that to be a framework property metadata, you can still set a default value, which you can see I'm setting to gray here, but you have this framework property metadata options. And you see that there's an option here to say binds two-way by default. Then I also hook up a change handler here so that whenever my background gets set, I'm going to go set the fill property of the rectangle that's my content. And then I'm also going to drop into the constructor of my custom control here and add an event handler for the mouse down event on my rectangle that's my content. And what I'm going to do when I get that click on it is I'm going to explicitly set the my background property to red so that we can see that that change actually occurred. So I'm going to go out here to my main window now and drop into the XAML and add an instance of our custom control. Notice that I'm setting the my background property to a brush returned from the current data context called the brush. So I need to go declare that in the code behind my main window that is my data context. So I add this dependency property called the brush to my code behind. And it's just a standard dependency property with a change handler that's hooked up here so we can set a breakpoint and tell when the binding has actually set that value for us. And then I'm just going to go into my constructor and set an initial value for my property of chartreuse. So with that in place, if I go ahead and run, we can see it starts up with our chartreuse rectangle. Remember that I have a mouse down handler inside the custom control that's going to set the my background property. That's equivalent to something like a text box setting the text property when I do data input on the control here. And we want to see that that value flows to the source object because the data binding is two-way. So when I click on this, we can see that our breakpoint is being hit in our change handler for the brush property in our data context. So the two-way data binding has worked out for us and is passing that value in. So the default mode for a binding is basically going to be one way unless the dependency property that you're binding to has gone and set its default to be two-way with this framework property metadata options.